At night, she brushed the ashes off the barn threshold so that no traces remained, pushed the door, swollen from the rain, with her shoulder, and led the ragged man to a pile of dry barley stalks. The guards were already searching around the dam and along the road, dogs sniffing at the water, slapping loudly on the logs of the bridge. She slid the bolt into place, propped it up with a pitchfork, and then, without stoking the fire, drew a simple mark on the wall with a piece of charcoal, 3 short lines, like a brand on surviving sheep. This was how she marked what she had promised to preserve. Dawn was not far off. She understood that by hiding the stranger, she was not only risking her farm, but also exposing her elderly neighbors, her lone lame cow, and the remnants of her herd, whose brands had recently been changed. But she did not back down. In the darkness, the stranger breathed evenly. His damp shirt smelled of the road, and his hands looked poor, without the calluses of a shepherd, but with thin old scars, like those of people who wrote a lot and erased even more. I welcome viewers. Please write in the comments where you are watching this video from, and I wish you pleasant listening. Her name was Marina. She grazed sheep on a distant slope from the village, where the wind bent the grass to the ground, and the ravine kept it in shadow until noon. The land on which the barn stood had once belonged to her father. Then a new castle manager arrived and announced that the debts had grown like burrs on a coat, and that the land would be leased and the flock would be temporarily taken to the courtyard to be counted and put in order. The recount dragged on for the whole of last year, and this spring it turned out that many of the sheep's brands had been changed and their ear notches had been moved. People whispered, but could not prove anything. There were clerks in the castle. Bars with royal seals for taxes lay in the manager's barn, and the villagers had only calloused fingers and old sticks with notches, which they used to calculate how much grain each person was entitled to. Marina did not know how to speak beautifully or at length, but she knew how to endure. In her mind, the flock was divided into groups, according to the patterns of their wool, their habits, and their gait. She knew which sheep would be the first to reach the salt lick, which would stand under a branch and rub itself until it bled, which lamb had been missing a piece of its right ear since childhood. She knew that a brand could be cut with a hot bone and reburned, but you couldn't fool the ear. The scar would give away any trickery. So when the flock was returned from the castle with new marks, she felt for the foreign marks with her eyes and fingers, and she realized their sheep had been mixed with strangers, and their best sheep had been transferred to the barons, as if that was how it had always been. It was not pity, but stubbornness that brought the beggar to the barn. In the evening, guards carried unmarked sacks and barrels at the dam, and in the darkness, the familiar back of the manager's junior clerk flashed by. He cursed that his hands were freezing for no reason, and told them not to make any noise because, he said, he had orders to check the salt warehouse and collect the night toll for the road. The sacks of salt, which had been taken from the fair anyway, suddenly passed through the village a second time. And then a stranger appeared on the road, and the guards reacted quickly and maliciously, like dogs on a weakling. He did not resist, but only looked at the water, as if searching for the end of a rope in it. In the barn, which smelled of sheepskin and old resin, the stranger lay on his back and listened to the wind cutting the tops of the grass at the threshold. He was not asleep. His ear, motionless, caught the footsteps outside. He asked, as if talking about bread, where they kept track of the tithe, and who kept records of the summer when the mosquitoes were especially thick. He said that he had rushed into the village not to escape pursuit, but to her, because he had seen her at the salt lick and realized that she was not looking away. He said that if she had her father's old stick with notches on it stored somewhere, it would have to be retrieved at dawn before the castle woke up. He told this without being asked, like a man who was used to not being believed, but who needed to tell the truth at least once. He did not name names. He only pulled a short strip of cloth from the hem of his shirt, on which there had once been a seal. The seal was gone, But the knot was tied, the way scribes in the royal offices tied knots, tight, double, with a loop that could be picked up with a fingernail like a quill. Marina paused, memorized it, but put off asking questions. At dawn, the guards knocked on her door. They said through the door that they had spent the night on the road, looking for vagrants, and that everyone had been ordered to let them near the fire and show them the barns. They said that the steward was keeping order. They said that anyone who did not hide a stranger would be punished. Marina nodded and quietly took her father's stick from under the hayloft. It had so many marks on it that at a glance one could remember the years. The year when half the herd was slaughtered because of the plague. The year of severe frosts, when the tithe was postponed. The year of the small flood, when the mill platform disappeared. None of the marks corresponded to the new entries in the manager's records, where a penalty for last year's tithe, which did not exist, had suddenly appeared. The guards rustled around, looked into the barn, touched the gate, kicked the charred door of the old stove, but did not go into the barn. The latch, propped up with a pitchfork, seemed too simple to them to hide anything important. They were cold, their knees ached, and they were afraid to linger with her, because they knew she was looking straight at them and meant business. They left, leaving wet footprints on the ground. When they left, the stranger got up. He shrugged his shoulders like a man accustomed to wearing a raincoat. He asked her to show him the stick with notches and the old receipts, and also asked which of the neighbors could count, not by ear, but by notches. He said he was not looking for people, but for discrepancies. He did not look like a clever peasant who had found himself among sheep. He knew how a bag of salt was made, and where it had weak stitching, so that salt could be poured out. He knew that the hooves of a sheep that had been driven over stones for a long time were cut differently. He knew that a scribe's horse would place its foot evenly on the grass, while a guard's horse would tear it up. He knew too much for a vagrant. Marina brought him a bundle of old tax receipts, neatly wrapped in cloth. His father had kept them in a chest behind a partition, but after his death, his mother had moved them to the barn, where no one rummaged. There were old orders for wheat, lists of salt deliveries, and several scraps that she could not read. The ink had smudged, and the symbols looked foreign. The stranger did not read aloud either. He could feel with his fingernail how many times the paper had been folded, whether there was moisture where there should not be any, and whether there were thin grooves from the quill, left by a scribe with a habit of pressing on the left side. He put everything back and said that the steward would come to the village in the evening. He would say that there would be an inspection of the gardens and fields, that lists needed to be prepared. He would bring food for the men, as he had done in previous years, and would hand out slices of bread directly into their palms so that everyone would feel his kindness. He would listen to their complaints aloud and smile, and then leave in the night. He would not dare stay until morning. He had work to do elsewhere. On the same day, people from the castle did indeed come to the village. The steward rode his horse at a gentle pace, as if they were in the city and not in the mud. He kept his hands in fur mittens, even though it wasn't that cold. He immediately noticed Marina, and his gaze slid toward her like water toward a low place. Something fluttered in his face when he saw the old copper button she wore around her neck as a talisman. She remembered the same button on her mother's shirt. The steward paused for only a moment, then smiled indiscriminately at everyone, like a man for whom faces are blades of grass in the same meadow. By evening, he announced that new land registrations would begin tomorrow. He said that the royal treasury had changed the rules, and that now it would be easier for those who paid their taxes on time to dispose of their land. He said that those who had old records could bring them, but they would be checked against the new seals, because in the past many had mixed up the dates. He said that everything would be done fairly. He said this confidently, and the men nodded out of habit. He said nothing about the night bags of salt, or the fact that the sheep's brands had been changed. When the people dispersed, The manager stopped his horse at Marina's barn and ordered the clerk to collect all the old papers for the new records. The clerk asked for all the old sticks with notches, which were kept by the men, to be taken out of the barn and brought to the castle for verification. Marina came out slowly and said that her stick was a memento of her father, and that according to custom, the sticks were not taken outside the yard. She said she could make a copy at the doorstep. The clerk smiled and said that was even better, because he had a new board and charcoal and would rewrite it on the spot. He sat down on the step and began to draw lines, frowning. He often made mistakes, rearranging tens and ones, like rearranging carts at a crossing. Marina saw this and said nothing. The stranger stood in the shadow of the barn, unnoticed. At one point, he picked up a thin, dry twig from the ground and began tapping it in time, as if counting not the charcoal lines, but the scribe's breaths. The scribe lost his place, jerked his hand, and called out a number that was not on the stick. The manager cleared his throat, gave a signal, and the scribe hastily changed the subject. Marina noticed how the manager's hand rested on the saddle horn. He was not calm. The next day, a chest was delivered to the village. It was brought by a silent driver, an old man with trembling fingers. On the lid was a wax seal with a crown and carvings that looked real, but without the fine notches that only the capitals carvers knew how to make. The old man said that the chest contained new samples of seals for the tithe, and a new charter for the lands. He said that the chest should be opened in front of witnesses in the evening, so that no one would have any doubts. He said that the key would be with the manager. He said that he had a mission. He said everything quickly and disappeared, as if dry grass were burning in his bosom. The chest was placed in the village hut. Mothers held their children by the sleeves. The men crowded at the threshold. The manager arrived closer to sunset. 2 men with pikes followed him. He held the key on a short leather strap. He didn't waste any time and ordered the chest to be placed on the table. He lowered the key, turned it, the lid opened, and the smell of rotten wood wafted out. Inside were bars with seals, rolled up pieces of parchment, and a thick book in a leather binding with no title on the spine. Marina stood by the window, and the stranger stood by the wall behind the bench. He noticed that the pin on the chest's hinge had recently been removed. There were fresh shavings on the head, which would not have been there if the chest had come directly from the castle. He noticed that one block with a seal at the bottom was worn differently from the others, as if it had been applied not to wax, but to thick black resin. He noticed that there were no traces of road dust on the book, although there were on the chest. He noticed too much, and at that moment, when the manager signaled to the clerk, he reached for the seal, but his hand trembled, and instead of the right block, he took the worn one. The seal fell softly on the wax, like bread on water. A crown without a cross at the top was imprinted on the wax. The people in the hall were silent because they did not understand where to look, but the stranger understood. Before him was a set for substitution. While everyone was looking at the chest, a young man appeared at the door, the same one who had been pulled out of the bushes by the road yesterday at dusk. He whispered that the guards had seen the fugitive and that he was hiding in this village. The guards turned to the people. The manager raised his hand to decide who to grab, and at that moment the stranger stepped out of the shadows, raised his palms, and said he was ready. He said he was not a vagrant, but a crown inspector who had arrived secretly on behalf of the marshal's chamber to investigate abuses complained of by peasants in a neighboring district. He said he had been detained on the road because the driver of the chest had tried to hand him a paper to sign that he was not supposed to sign. He said he had an order, but he would not show it in front of people because the order was for another room. He said this without pride or defiance, like a man who had decided to throw open the door before it was broken down. A murmur rose in the hut. The young people leaned forward, the old people leaned back. The manager remained calm, only his hand tightened on his belt. He said that if he was an inspector, why was he hiding in a shepherdess's barn instead of going to the castle? The stranger said he wanted to see how people lived here before going to see him. He said he had seen unmarked sacks of salt, replaced marks on sheep, and a chest with forged seals. He said that the crown needed to see deeds, not words. He said he had asked the shepherdess to hide him from the guards, not for his own safety, but so that he could see the chest being opened. The manager realized that something was amiss. He ordered his men to take the stranger away. But the two men with pikes hesitated, because the word of the crown is louder than the cry of the manager. They looked at each other, then at the chest. And at that moment, Marina did what she did best, quickly and precisely. She stepped up to the table, picked up the worn seal with her fingernail, pressed it again into the wax in the same place, and clearly showed that the crown on the impression was different. Then she picked up her stick and placed it next to the open book. The notches showed one thing, the new numbers showed another. The book contained numbers that were missing from their sticks. The difference vanished into thin air. The crowd began to murmur differently. The rumbling grew heavier. The old men stopped backing away. The young men put their hands on their hips. At that moment, a man in a cloak appeared in the doorway, whom no one was expecting. The palace secretary from the city, who had accompanied the inspector on another matter, and lost him at the crossing. He said he had searched for him through 3 villages. He said he had seen the book being copied in the castle during the night. He said he did not want to speak any more in the common room. He said this calmly, like a man accustomed to putting seals where they should be, and keeping silent where silence was required. The manager realized that the room had become cramped and the air sharp. Everyone moved to the castle, not to the main hall with carpets, but to the cold lower hall, where sacks were stored and simple lamps hung. That was the inspector's decision. He needed to see the bars, the sacks, the books, the people. He signaled Marina to follow him. He took the manager's scribe, 2 guards, the chest carrier, and 3 men from the village who had sticks with notches from long ago. He did not take anyone extra. In the lower hall, the inspector ordered all the sacks of salt to be opened. In 2 of them, the salt was damp and clumped together, with gray streaks, a sign of ground alabaster being added. In the 3rd, the salt was larger than usual, as if it came from somewhere else. He showed the difference silently. He poured a handful from the right bag and a handful from the left onto the table, ran his finger over them, leaving grooves like those made by a feather. Then he took the seal bars and applied them to a piece of wax given to him by the secretary. On one seal, the crown was even. On the other, there was a small mistake by the craftsman, a crooked lower prong. There was no such thing on the real seals. Then the manager said that the goods could have come from the fair, that someone else's bags had been switched on the road, that the seals had been sent from old stocks. He said this confidently, but years of training had not prepared him for one thing. The fat in his words crumbled like wet salt. The inspector did not argue. He asked the clerk to open the large book containing the land records for the last 3 years. The clerk turned pale but opened it. The inspector did not read aloud. He placed the sticks of the 3 men and Marina's stick next to each other. He pointed to the lines where the number on the stick was exactly as much as could be taken from the unmarked bag in one night. He showed the cycle. In the spring, the replacement of sheep brands. In the summer, the extra collection of salt. In the fall, a sudden penalty for the absence of last year's grain, of which there was enough. He showed that these were not random mistakes, but a coherent chain. The manager stood and listened. At one point, he glanced at the copper button on Marina's neck. She saw this glance and suddenly remembered how her mother once pushed her away from a silk stall at a fair, where a young man was sitting with the same hand movement and the same facial features as the manager. Her mother had said then, that someone else's silk ties you with tiny threads to those from whom you cannot escape. She said it calmly, as if she were talking about salt, and then Marina didn't understand anything, but now it became clearer to her. The inspector asked for the old woman who sold milk at the castle gate to be brought to the hall. He said he had seen her serving pie to the scribe every week, and that she could be trusted with only one thing. She knew who was coming and going and at what time. The old woman came, gasping for breath. She said that the steward often returned to the castle late at night, when the third watch was on the tower. She said that on those nights there was no smoke coming from the kitchen chimney at the gate, but there was a smell of burnt resin. She said that the scribe followed him with a bag, which then disappeared. She said that this had been happening since the spring of the year before last, when the old baroness died, and there was chaos in the castle. The inspector nodded. He took a small leather pouch from his sleeve and poured several thin bone sticks with markings onto the table. These were copies of seals from the city, samples for comparison. He placed them on the wax next to the bars from the chest. There were no matches. Then he took out a short scroll and placed the seal of the marshal's chamber on the table. The secretary behind him nodded. He said that the inspection had been conducted on orders from the capital since the 15th day of the month of November last year, and today was the 12th day of the month of harvest. He said this clearly, and the paper on the table ceased to be just paper. While everyone was looking at the seals, Marina sat down at the table and ran her finger along the bottom corner of the book. Where the two leather strips met, a thin pocket had been sewn in. She felt something hard under the upholstery, pulled a needle out of her sleeve, and hooked the edge. A narrow strip of parchment fell out of the slit. It contained a short note. Debt write-off, 2 courtyards in the name of a widow from a distant village, and a signature similar to that of the Baroness. But the Baroness had died a year ago, and the write-off was dated later, this spring. The ink had not yet had time to darken. The manager turned pale. The clerk looked away. The secretary glanced at the inspector. The inspector nodded. He ordered the guards to close the doors and not let anyone out. He said there was one thing that needed to be done before calling the judge from the city. He said he wanted to find out how far the substitutions had gone, and that he needed to go through the pens. In the pen for the baron's flock, he found a sheep with an ear notch that was different from the ones they always made in their village. They usually cut a neat triangle, but here it was a rough notch. He called 3 men and told them to name the sheep. They said it was their sheep, Marinina, which they named after her habit of always going to the water a minute earlier than the others. He checked 5 more. 3 of them were from the village. He realized that it was not just a matter of salts and lands. The manager had a well-oiled mill of petty theft. Then the inspector turned to Marina and asked if she had any more evidence. He asked this not for the book, but for himself. And she remembered the old button. She said that her mother wore the same one, and that once at a fair she saw a young man at a silk shop with the same cheekbone line as the manager. She said her mother had pushed her away and told her to stay away from that row. She said that afterwards her mother often looked at the road to the castle and hid the button under her shirt. She said that when her mother was dying, she left the button to her and said that it was a memento of the man who did not become family because he chose ransom over promise. She said this quietly, because otherwise there would be too much inside. The hall fell silent. The steward couldn't take it any more, and said she was making it up. But there was no strength in his voice. The secretary stepped forward and said that there was a record in the town book of an old case, when a young apprentice from the castle, having barely received the position of scribe, paid money instead of the promised marriage to a woman from the village, and that the Baroness then hid the case under the cover of the book because she did not want a scandal. He said that the signature was the same. He said this not maliciously, but as a man who was accustomed to laying bricks one by one. And then it became clear. The manager was a man who had once chosen money over a promise, and who had now built his entire power on records and substitutions. He turned out to be connected to Marina's mother by a long-ago deed that had come back like a boomerang. It was not a blood relationship, but a knot from the past, tight and old, which he had long considered untied. The inspector ordered the manager to be tied up and put in a small windowless room until the judge arrived. He ordered the clerk to be taken to another corner and instructed the secretary to rewrite the books from the tally sticks, checking with people rather than with the numbers in the notebooks. He said that the herd should be returned to those from whom it had been taken, and that the land should be reviewed according to the old rights. He did not shout or rush. He did what he knew how to do. He pieced together the facts until they formed a clear picture. By evening, the castle smelled not of resin, but of boiling water and sheep's wool. People began to bring their sheep back from the baron's pens. Marina stood at the gate and counted them by their ears, their wool, their steps. Her flock was returning, like water to its old channel. She held her stick tightly, like the hand of her dead father. She did not cry because she knew it was still too early. At night, when it was truly dark, the inspector came to the barn. He said that tomorrow the papers had to be taken to the city, that the judge would be there in 2 days, that he needed help, not hands to carry, but eyes to check. He said that she saw what others did not notice. He said it wasn't just about sheep, but about people. He said that if she agreed, he would leave her a choice after the trial. He said he hadn't seen such tenacity in a long time. Marina nodded. A simple line suddenly formed in her head. From the evening bag of salt to the tent at the fair, from a stranger's stamp to a button, from a mark on a sheep to a number in a book. She felt scared and calm at the same time. She realized that the morning would bring not only the return of the sheep, but also the return of the land that had been under her feet all this time, but on paper, not hers. The morning was dry. The bell in the tower rang 3 times. A judge from the city arrived at the castle, a man with a straight back and a habit of putting his hand on the table before speaking. He did not come alone, but with servants and 2 seal-masters. He ordered the chest to be opened again and all the bars to be laid out. He checked them slowly, one by one, without looking at their faces. He ordered the books and tally sticks to be brought forward. He listened as the secretary read the records, occasionally looking up at the people to check their faces against what he heard. He asked who among those present had lost sheep that spring. Almost everyone raised their hands. He told them to lower their hands and name one detail of each disappearance that could not be replaced: an ear, a spot, a habit. He wrote down each detail in a separate line as grain measurements are usually recorded. He did everything simply but accurately. Then he ordered the manager to be brought in. The manager entered, pale but dry. He said he had never ordered the seals to be replaced. He said he had not stolen the salt. He said he had not imposed excessive penalties. He said that if the seals were not the right ones, it was the fault of the engravers. He said this and fell silent because there was no more air. The judge nodded to the seal-masters. They showed the difference between the real and the fake. On the real one, the crown had a straight tooth. On the fake one, it was crooked. They showed that the wax on the bars had traces of resin. They said that resin is used when wax is expensive or when they want the seal to be easier to remove. They said this in a businesslike manner, without unnecessary words. The judge turned to the scribe. He admitted that he copied books at night, under the dictation of the manager, and that sometimes the numbers got mixed up. He said that he was paid with extra bread each month, and that he did not consider it theft. He said that he carried out the orders because he was afraid that otherwise he would be sent away. He said he was a weak man. The judge nodded and did not insult him. He ordered the confession to be recorded. Then he asked who could confirm that the records contradicted the notches on the sticks. He asked Marina to put her stick on the table again. She did so. He asked how she counted. She pointed to the old rough notches and said that this one was for the year of the plague, this one was for the year of severe frosts, and this one was for the year of the small flood. He asked if she could remember how many sheep she had before the spring replacement. She named them, adding which ones were missing. He checked the records they had made yesterday and nodded. Then the judge turned to the inspector. The latter outlined the entire course of the observations: the bags of salt, the forged seals, the chest with the removable pin, the secret pocket in the book, the substitution of stamps, the manager's nightly returns, the scribe's confession. He explained calmly, in order, as if stacking firewood for a bonfire. The secretary confirmed the dates. The craftsman confirmed the seals. The old woman with the milk confirmed the nighttime visits. The men confirmed the sheep. Everything fell into place. The judge said that according to the law, the land and herds must be returned to their former owners. He said that the manager would be put in chains and sent to the city for trial to determine his punishment. He said that the scribe would remain under supervision until the complete reconciliation was finished, and then his fate would be decided, taking into account his confession. He said that from today onwards, all taxes taken in excess would be credited to the farms from which they were taken, and that the shortfall from the treasury would be covered by the steward's property. He said that the herds would be returned immediately, and that new ribbons bearing the seal of the masters would be placed on their tails so that no one would touch them on the way back. He said this without malice or triumph. It was not about moralizing. It was about order. At that moment, the inspector did something no one expected. He asked the judge for permission to speak. The judge nodded. The inspector said he wanted to add one detail to the case that did not change the law, but was important to the people. He said that he had come here on the tip-off of people from a neighboring district, but had stayed because of Marina. He said he saw how she counted the herd, not by the brands from the castle, but by their habits, and realized that there were eyes here that would not overlook the substitution. He said he wanted to acknowledge her contribution to the investigation. He said he would ask the marshal's office to appoint Marina as the senior herd and stick marking officer in the county. He said it was not an honorary title, but a job. He said that if she refused, he would understand. He said this without embellishment. A whisper went through the room. Someone smiled. Some saw it as a challenge. Marina heard something simple in it. Her vision had proved more useful than quiet obedience. Her skill, which had been dismissed as feminine cunning with sheep, had proved key to the case. It was that moment when a person from below breaks stereotypes without raising their voice. The judge nodded. He said that from a legal standpoint, there was no obstacle to appointing a person from the village to such a role if he could handle it. He said that the decision would be made in the city. He said that in any case, Marina's land would be returned to her as of today, along with the boundaries that had been established under her father. He said that the herd would be returned as well. He said that the crown thanked her for her help. He said that the reward was not only words, but also rights. After the trial, there followed days that are not usually talked about in the village, because they are uneventful. Days of checks, moving boundary stones, checking sheep brands, delivering papers here and there. The inspector lived in the castle, and every day he walked around the yards, writing, asking questions, listening. He visited sick old people, checked their sticks and notches, and compared them with the books. He never tired. He did what the crown had taught him to do. Check not words, but deeds. And every evening he returned to the barn, where empty hooks now jingled. The sheep were already grazing in the meadow, and no longer slept in cramped quarters. One such evening, He came home later than usual. He sat on the threshold of the barn and was silent for a long time. Then he said he had something to confess. He said that he first learned about the village not from a denunciation, but from a letter from an old craftsman from the city who had once been a boy in their region. The same boy who many years ago had been hidden in a barn by a young woman when people from the castle came for him. He said that the boy had survived, become a craftsman, and then a mentor to the inspectors. He said that this craftsman had sent him a note. If you find yourself in those parts, stick with the shepherds, look for ears, not brands, and remember that in one house they will hide you as they hid me. He said that he didn't immediately understand who he was talking about, but then, when he saw Morena's barn, he understood everything. He said that duty sometimes goes in circles, like a herd to a salt lick. He said that he was that boy. He said it calmly, without embellishment. Morena listened and felt the long circle of the past and present closing. She realized that her mother had once saved a man who had now saved their land and their herd. It was a hidden kinship, not by blood, but by an act that had come back like a boomerang. It was not a miracle. It was the result of someone not turning away once. 3 days later, people from the city arrived with documents. The judge returned with seals. He read out the decision. Morena's land was to be returned in full. The boundary stones were to be placed according to the old markings. The herd was recognized as her property. The shortage of salt and penalties were to be written off. The overpayment was to be returned in grain and silver from the manager's property and from the castle's reserves, and the inspector was given the right to appoint a senior officer to keep track of the sticks and notches in the district. He read out the dates in full. From the 15th day of November last year to the 12th day of harvest this year, the traces of substitutions in the Zemstvo books were recognized as illegal. He read this without pathos. People listened as they listen to rain after a drought. Then there was silence, in which you could hear the flapping of pigeons' wings on the roof. The inspector stood up and turned to Morena. He said that his assignment was over, but he still had the right to make one gesture. He said that he wanted to give her back not only her herd and her land, but also her freedom of choice. He said she could stay and run the farm, becoming the senior accountant, or go to the city and work at the chamber if she wanted to. He said he would not insist. He said he remembered the barn that night, and that duty did not always require presence. Morena looked at the meadow where the sheep grazed, and at the boundary stones that the men had set. She felt the ground beneath her feet, which was hers again, and realized that she could not leave now. Her place was here. She said she would stay and keep track of the sticks, teach her neighbors to do the same, so that the books would no longer dare to contradict the notches. She said she would come to the castle and check the seals of those who brought them. She said she would ask the judge and the craftsman to conduct a reconciliation every year on the same day in early autumn, so that no one would slack off. She said she would keep the barn door open for those who came with the right cause. She said this not for beauty or honor, but because it made life easier. The inspector nodded. He said he had what was needed for such a decision: paper, a seal, and trust. He said he was leaving tomorrow. He said he would leave her a small bag of silver that had been taken from the manager so that she could buy new rams to improve the flock. He said it was not a gift, but a return. He said it briefly. In the evening, the village brought bread, milk, and pieces of dried meat to her barn. No one spoke grand words. A neighbor boy brought a bone to make her a new, straighter walking stick. The old men brought bundles of herbs for the sheep. The women passed on pieces of cloth. It was not gratitude in words, but simple help. It could not be faked with a seal. Before leaving, the inspector went into the barn once more. He placed the old cloth ribbon without a seal, which he had shown on the first night, on the table, and next to it, a new one with a real seal. He said he kept the old one as a reminder that sometimes you have to walk into the darkness without a seal. He left the new one as a sign that the darkness had receded. He said he would never forget how the hay smelled that night. He said it simply and left. He left early in the morning, when a low haze still hung over the meadow. He didn't look back, because he knew that now everything here would be their concern, not his, and they would manage. The road took him to the city, where there would be books again, seals, people with short glances and long fears. It was easier for him than when he had come here. Life returned to normal. Marina grazed the sheep, put new ribbons on their tails, and taught the boys to count by their ears, not by papers. Once a month, she went up to the castle and checked the seals of those who brought the bars. The secretary, who was now in charge of the books, never objected. He became friends with the sticks and notches, as if they were family. The judge came in the fall, on the same day she requested and conducted the reconciliation. The clerk, who was not sent to the city, now worked under supervision, and his hand stopped confusing tens with ones. He began to go to church, not for show, but out of habit, which cures fear. No one spoke about the village manager. He was taken to the city in shackles, and there they would decide what to do with him next. The old woman's milk business was doing better, because people now liked to buy from those who spoke little but accurately. Marina did not consider herself a heroine. She did what she knew how to do. She did not seek rewards, and so the reward found her. The herd returned to her, the land returned to her feet, and her name began to be mentioned when people spoke of justice without flowery words. She did not melt from this. She just began to sleep more soundly. One late autumn day, when the first snow had settled like a thin skin on the meadow, a cart pulled up to the barn. In it sat a boy from a neighboring village with a basket. In the basket was a small lamb with a white crescent-shaped spot on its forehead. The boy said his mother had asked him to say that it was from those whose sheep had returned home thanks to her. He said they had named the lamb Listener because it always pricked up its ears a step ahead. He said they wanted this lamb to live in her flock to remind her of that day. Marina smiled slightly. She took the lamb, stroked its head, and placed it with the warm sheep. She took out a notching stick and made a small new mark. She liked how the dry wood accepted the new mark. She thought that each such mark was like a silent law that people write for themselves when no one is looking. In the evening, she went out to the meadow. The wind was steady and light. The sheep stood close together and chewed. In the distance, she could see the castle, no longer as tall as it had been in those terrible days. Boundary stones clearly marked the border. On one of them, someone had carved a short message with a knife. Promises must be paid for with actions. The words were crooked but clear. She ran her finger over them and walked back. On the road, she remembered the first night, dark and wet, a stranger's breath in the barn, a rustle at the threshold, a pitchfork under the latch, and how simple important things sometimes begin. She didn't try to find meaning in every step. She just walked. It was quiet inside. Goodness led to reward, not because someone high up decided to show mercy, but because someone once hid a stranger, and many years later, that stranger returned not only the herd and the land, but also calm straightforwardness in human affairs. It was not a miracle. It was the work of hands, eyes, and memory. And that was enough.